So I've had kind of a heartbreaking week due to some national news. Apparently, last week there was a megachurch pastor in Memphis who kind of had his dirty laundry aired to the world as part of the Me Too movement, and clearly he had to say something about it on Sunday. But what he said and how everyone responded, kind of, it was a disaster. He stood up and he gave like a half apology, which is to say that he told part of the truth. He called it an incident, but in the law in the United States of America, if you're a 20-something youth pastor with a minor-aged high school student, that's not an incident, it's an assault. And he didn't quite really own what had happened, and his church kind of got up, and the other pastor put his arms, and we're 1,000% behind him, and at the end he said, I'm really sorry, and I hope, she can forgive me, because I know God has forgiven me. And the church stood up and gave him a standing ovation, and so that's on the cover of the New York Times, and it's on Washington Post and CNN, and everybody. Church gives standing ovation to admitted sex abuser, and it just, it frustrates and deeply enrages me, and it was the wrong response. Was wrong. He wasn't wrong, and the church wasn't wrong to say God forgave him. He did, and his junk is pretty dirty. That story's pretty gross. But he's no less worthy of the forgiveness of God than me or you. We all got stuff in our lives that makes us so far gone and so far cut off, and so he is completely forgiven. But the church acting like, whatever, he's sorry, she needs to find healing and forgive him too, fails to take into account her pain and the reality of the situation. And the thing I think that gives me the deepest, holy discontent at that situation is there didn't seem to be a lot of brokenness. It wasn't a broken church coming and saying, man, there was pain caused here, and I'm sorry. It was just well, God says this, it's all good, forget about it, move on. And there's a similar situation in the Bible where a guy in a leadership position kind of had his dirty laundry aired that he had been trying to hide for a while. King David had a best friend. One of his closest buddies was named Uriah, and while Uriah was off fighting a war, David summoned Uriah's wife to the palace, and he got her pregnant, and then he couldn't figure out a way around it, and so he had Uriah sent to the front of the lines, and Uriah got killed. And so David is a murderer and an abuser and a cheater, and he's trying to kind of keep that all quiet. And then the prophet Nathan came and just aired his dirty laundry, and all of a sudden it was exposed. But David had kind of a different response than these guys in Memphis. David was shattered. He just fell to his knees, and he was racked, and he realized, oh my goodness, this is deeper than just saying I'm sorry and confessing the sin. I need to actually deal with what happened. And so he prayed this prayer, God, break me. And he wrote it down in Psalm 51. It's this incredible prayer of brokenness and repentance. And that's kind of the prayer we've been talking about this week, break me. And it's a dangerous prayer. It's a dangerous prayer that kind of builds on that prayer, search me and know me. God, all that stuff that you found inside me, all that junk that you brought out, break me over that stuff. That's a prayer that we walk into knowing that there is pain on the other side of God answering that prayer. Because what happens for David after he prays it, after he comes before God, is that he actually sees how dirty his sin is. He's been trying to think that it maybe wasn't that bad, and he's been making excuses, or maybe saying, God forgives and it's okay. And he asks God to break him, and God just kind of lays bare how gross and how rotten and how evil his heart is. And he sees himself the way God sees him, and he just writes, God, you're justified when you judge. Please hide your face from this. Please blot out my iniquity. Please don't look, because what I'm seeing just, it tears me apart. And I think for us too, break me is a dangerous prayer, because there's a lot of pain in seeing our sin the way God sees it. There's a lot of pain in really understanding what it costs, what we've given up to chase our sin. And there's a lot of pain in seeing the hurt that it caused other people. Because we got to stop blaming others. When we see our sin for what it is, when we see it the way that God sees it, then we don't get to play the victim anymore. We're not going to say, well, it's their fault, kind of, and look at the pain it caused me. We realize that we're the perpetrator, and we see the pain that it caused the victim, and it hurts, man. It it hurts, and it shatters you. There's ugly tears when you see what your sin really looks like, but it creates space to move forward. And that's what happens for David. He moves forward to get his heart restored, and he says, God, would you cleanse me and wash me whiter than snow? And I love this line. He says, God, let the bones which you have crushed rejoice. So God, I like you took me from this place of hiding and you exposed me, and then you just shattered me against my sin, and I feel like my bones are crushed, my body's crushed, my soul is crushed. I'm shattered here. Can you put that back together and heal it and let them rejoice? And then there's all these words of restoring and renewing, like creating me a clean heart and restore the joy of my salvation. And that's what God does. Like, God takes our broken pieces and he puts them back together in a way that allows us to move forward looking and loving a little bit more like Jesus than we did before, than we did when we pretended that our sin wasn't a big enough deal to be broken over. And then he charts this new path for us. He charts this new path for David. David gets to the end and he's like, okay, God, I'm going to teach transgressors. I'm going to teach sinners. I'm going to take the broken experiences of my life and use them to help other people be better and help other people avoid that pain. Because David gets it, that in the middle of your greatest dysfunction, you still have a destiny. And he says, okay, I never should have gotten to this place that I got to, but God, can you take me from here and point me in the direction of where you want me to be? And that's exactly what God does for David. And it's what God does for us too, if we're willing to come and just say, hey, break my heart over my sin so that you can put it back together and use my brokenness and use my failure to impact the world and to point people toward Jesus. Break me is a dangerous prayer. Like, I'm warning you right now, if you can muster up the guts to pray it, you're going to find some hurt in it. Because you're going to see the grossness of your life the way that God sees it. And it's just ugly, awful stuff. But God will meet you there, and He'll put your heart back together, and He'll give you purpose. So I just want to challenge you not to be afraid to pray it. Not to be afraid to come before God and invite Him to break your heart over your sin, to break your heart for the world and for the pain that you've caused and for the pain that you see all around you. I think we don't pray it, and I think some of you won't pray it, and I think the biggest reason is you're afraid of the hurt that it'll cause. But the thing I can't get over is I think fear of pain is one of the greatest inhibitors to progress in our entire lives. The fear of pain. Like, we just don't want to hurt. But there's no growth without change, and there is no change without loss, and there is no loss without pain. And so if you want to grow, if you want to move from the space where you are, the space where you shouldn't have gotten to, and you want to take your sin and not just know it, but really deal with it in a way that brings hope and healing and reconciliation to the people it's hurt, and brings you to a place where you can take your brokenness, your worst moments, and use them to point people towards Jesus, then you gotta let God break you. And He'll do it. He'll break your heart, but He'll rebuild it, and He'll give you purpose. And so I just challenge you to find the guts to pray that this week.